everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be my mid-month wrap-up for March, and I have 19 books to talk to you about today. So this is probably going to be going up later than I really wanted, but I haven't really been in the mood to film lately, so you know, we're doing what we can. Like always, I'll start from my lowest rated and work my way up to the highest rated. And there's quite a few higher rated books to talk about, so that's exciting. So the lowest rated book I have is a 2.5 star book, and that is Are We Nearly There Yet by Lucy Vine. So this came in the Unplugged book box for January, I think. And unfortunately, I didn't think it was all that funny, which was a bummer. So the premise here is that the main character, Alice, turns 30 and kind of has a breakdown because everyone else around her has kind of been growing up and she basically still wants to party. So she ends up going to travel around the world and goes to LA and Thailand to find herself and does a travel blog along the way. She eventually kind of grows up and realizes that she has to confront her own behavior. This was alright. There were parts that were kind of enjoyable. I just really disliked the main character Alice though. I thought she was a massive bitch and just incredibly full of herself and just so rude and just incredibly self-absorbed. So, and the other characters weren't all that likable as either, so I don't know. As a whole, I just didn't really connect with anyone. Like I kind of mentioned, Alice does eventually grow up and make some progress becoming a little bit more likable, but as a whole, at the end of the book, I still didn't love her. I didn't think this was terribly funny, and I think just looking at other Goodreads reviews, a lot of other people do find this funny, so maybe it's just not for me. I don't know. There was a fun inclusion of blog posts, I think maybe not every chapter, but a lot of chapters, so that was kind of entertaining. There's maybe some content warnings for a strange relationship with parents. And I also felt there was a little bit of fat shaming in this book, just to throw that out there, I guess. So overall, not for me, and I wouldn't personally recommend it, but looking at Goodreads reviews, it does look like a lot of people do enjoy this. So if it still sounds interesting to you, check out other Goodreads reviews and see what you think.
Hey guys, so again, the audio on my camera was doing weird stuff, so I'm just gonna have to do a voiceover and we'll do our best here. But yeah, so the only 3-star book that I had to talk about was this Game of Thrones, A Guide to Westeros and Beyond, the complete series by Myles McNutt. So this is just an overview of all the characters and dynamics throughout the series, the show mostly. So, a lot of this didn't go into a ton of depth. A lot of the characters just had a couple of paragraphs and, it was just brief overviews and everything. But, yeah, I mean, it was pretty good and informative, but, I mean, it's not the best inside making of a show type movie or inside a show book I've ever read. So they did have some really cool infographics here. So this was probably my favorite. So this was glasses of wine, Cersei versus Tyrion throughout all of 8 seasons. So that was probably the best part of the book for me. And they had a couple of other cool infographics. But yeah, so overall, I think it was, again, not the best behind the scenes or info type book ever, but I did enjoy it overall. And I think if you're a big fan of Game of Thrones, or you want to, or maybe you don't have a whole lot of knowledge about Game of Thrones, this could be helpful just to get a brief overviews and evereverything of the characters.
Now we move into the 3.5 star range, and the first book I'll talk about is Geekerella by Ashley Poston, I think. So I listened to this on audio, and this is basically a retelling of Cinderella that takes place around and at a sci-fi convention. So our main character, Elle's dad, started a Comic-Con for Starfield, and this is some sort of Star Trek or Star Wars type series. So Elle is a huge fan of this, so she grew up watching it and talking about it with her dad. So she actually runs a blog all about Starfield, so that was fun. They're essentially remaking this show into a movie, and the male lead is just a really popular star, so there's a lot of I guess controversy surrounding that choice, because they're this is diehard Starfield fans are oh, he can't do justice to the character, etc. So this was a really fun retelling. I liked the twist on the magic pumpkin. I thought that was really fun. It's actually a food truck. I also liked her friend Sage. I liked this whole Starfield aspect and the whole convention setting. I thought that was like delightfully nerdy. I did like it, like listening to it on audio. I thought that was pretty well done, and like it kept me engaged and wanting to listen to it. I do like the relationship that does develop in the book. The author did a really great job of like depicting the stepmom and one of the stepsisters as being like really awful, and just like every time they were involved in a scene, I would just get so angry because I actually just like hated them so much. But yeah, so this was a fun retelling of Cinderella, and I think there are 2 more books in the series. One maybe just recently came out, I'm not entirely sure, but I think the second one is a retelling of The Prince and the Pauper, and then the third is, I think, some sort of Beauty and the Beast type retelling. So I'm kind of interested in looking at those because I like this whole Starfield aspect, and, you know, just like convention and this love letter to geeky culture, I guess, is super fun. The next 3.5-star book that I'll talk about is The Last Mile in Sunder City by Luke Arnold. So this is an urban fantasy where magic has basically disappeared, so magical creatures are essentially falling apart, so that's not good. Our main character, Fetch Phillips, is a human, and he's kind of like a private investigator of sorts, and he's hired to find a missing vampire. And like along the way, trying to find out what happened to this vampire, he uncovers more mysteries. I like how we actually learn in the book how the magic ends up going away. This was a really interesting background, and it's kind of like woven into the story with some like flashbacks where we experience Fetch's life before this like magical apocalypse type thing. Fetch is a like very broken protagonist, and he's got a bit of a like an alcohol and painkiller problem, so, you know, just like be aware going into that. Like at times he was kind of not the most enjoyable character to read from, but you know, it is what it is. It's definitely like a very bleak setting for the book overall, but there are threads of hope, I think, throughout this, so that I think kind of redeemed things, because I'm like I've kind of mentioned this before, I'm not like super big on grimdark, so having like some hopeful aspects definitely made me enjoy this more. I think this was very well done for a debut, and I think it's a really interesting world. There's certainly some like pacing issues where there's like some lulls in the story, but overall, and like I kind of mentioned, Fetch is not the most enjoyable main character, but interesting, and you know, it's actually really sad to see all these like magical creatures dying because of this magical apocalypse type thing. I mean, it's not really an apocalypse, but you know, magic going away. Overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm interested in continuing.
So my camera's doing weird shit with the audio again, so I'm just going to have to do another voiceover. But the next 3.5-star book I have to talk about is A Queen in Hiding by Sarah Kozloff, and this is the first one in that like 4-book, over 4-month series that Tor is doing. So the plot here is actually not what's promised on the back of the book. So we follow Queen Cressa as she discovers a plot to take over the throne, and she ends up hiding her daughter Cerulia and like goes to fight against this plot. So Cerulia ends up growing up with a foster family. So the synopsis here is really not what it promises on the back of the book. Like the back of the book kind of mentions, you know, like Cerulia's learning about her magic, and there's like spirits involved, and she has to become a guerrilla fighter. But like, that's not really what this book is about. This really feels like a prologue to the story that's promised in the synopsis, and we really cover quite a bit of time here. Like Cerulia starts off being like 8 years old, I think, and we just cover a large span of time in the book. The magic system is quite interesting, though. Cerulia can talk to animals, which I thought was super cool. And then I think there were a whole bunch of random people introduced throughout the book, and that was a little strange to me. They were just kind of like randomly introduced, I guess.
I assume that they'll come into play later on in the book, but it just felt like they were just kind of like thrown in there, and I was like, do I know this person already? I don't know. I did like Queen Cressa quite a bit, and I thought she was, you know, very strong and intelligent. I liked how she's like fighting to protect her daughter. And like I mentioned, Cerulia is much younger than I expected. She starts off being 8 years old, I think. There's a lot of time jumps. Sometimes like a small span of years will be really long, and then other times we'll jump like, I don't know, 5 years in a span of a few pages. It was kind of odd pacing, I guess. So Cerulia herself is just okay at this point in time. Like, she's a little whiny, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really connect with her here as much, but I don't know if, presumably we'll follow her as she grows up, and like maybe once she starts to grow up, she'll be a little more relatable. I don't know. But yeah, like at this point, it was good, but I'm not sure if I really want to continue the story, just because like I'm worried that the second book would still feel kind of like a long drawn out prologue type book. So I don't know. It's an interesting world. Like I said, I do like the magic system, but we'll see. We'll see if I pick up the second book in the series. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, an Introvert story by Debbie Tung. So this is the same comic writer, drawer, illustrator, whatever, as Book Love, which I read a couple of months ago and really loved. So this one is basically cute comics about being an introvert. And it's kind of like Debbie Tung's autobiography a little bit. Like the art style is very nice, and a lot of these comics are very relatable, I think. It's not quite as good as Book Love, and, I didn't relate to everything, I guess, but like I feel like Book Love I related to basically everything, and this one is like, okay, some of this yes, some of this no. It does talk about social anxiety and like kind of running out of energy after interacting with people. It's really cute though, and I would recommend it. It's a very easy read, and I think this art style is adorable. So I'll definitely be picking up any other books that she releases that are comics and everything. So yeah, if you're in the mood for a fun, cheerful comic, I would check this one out for sure. The last 3.5-star book I'll talk about is The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. So this is set in New Orleans in 1872, and this is, I guess, kind of like a historical urban fantasy. I don't know. So our main character, Celine, moves to New Orleans from Paris, and she initially stays at a convent, and then like encounters, I think it's like the Court of the Lions, and we also have a plot where there's a serial killer on the loose that's like eventually coming after Celine. So we do have some supernatural beings like vampires included here, but it's not really focused on them as much, I would say. It seems to be, to me at least, to be more of like a historical mystery with like a side element, I guess, of vampires and everything like that.
And yet again, I'm having to do a voiceover. Yay, me. So anyway, I think going into it knowing that it's not going to be super focused on vampires actually helped make me enjoy it more. So that would be my recommendation to you if you're going to pick this up. Like, go into it knowing it's going to be more of like a historical mystery with a side element of supernatural creatures rather than like completely focused on the vampires. So then, let's see. I think this was pretty enjoyable overall. I liked the setting quite a bit. Celine was a decent main character. I think she does some things that she thinks, and she thinks she's like really awful and an awful person, but I feel like she kind of needed to do what she did to survive. So I didn't really mind that. I think that the writing is engaging overall. There's a bit of insta-love, I thought, but I've seen other people think it's more of like a slow burn romance, so maybe that's like a your mileage may vary sort of issue. I think one of the things that I didn't really enjoy about Celine was I didn't like how she pushes her best friend away without like talking to her, and it's tough. Like, I know she's trying to protect her friend, but I was like, you could literally just have a conversation about this. Like, I'm sure she would understand what's going on, but no, we just gotta like push her away and not really tell her what's happening. So that was mildly annoying. But anyway, overall, I did enjoy this, and I'm interested in continuing the series. I think the next book comes out sometime this year, so I think I'll be picking it up.
So now we move into the 4-star range, and the first book I'll talk about here is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. So this is 3 stories about Dunk and Egg, and this is set, I think, like the first story is maybe 150 years before the events in Game of Thrones. So Dunk is a hedge knight, and Egg is his squire. So the first story is kind of about Dunk wanting to compete in a tournament. The second story is about land rights, and then third story is about a wedding and a dragon egg. So this was quite enjoyable. I thought it was nice to be back in Westeros, and it kind of reminded me just like, oh yeah, George R. R. Martin is actually a really good writer. So Dunk is not the smartest, but I think he's kind of like a true knight with honor. So that was kind of fun to read about. And, usually in The Song of Ice and Fire, like these really honorable people don't tend to have good outcomes. And overall, this book is much more cheerful. So that's kind of like a nice change of pace, I guess. Obviously, bad things still kind of happen, but I would say like overall the tone is much more lighthearted than A Song of Ice and Fire. There's also really wonderful illustrations in here, so I think that like really added to the experience. Egg is an interesting character. I like how he goes to Squire for a Dunk and how he like learns about people, and we find out more about him as we go along, and I enjoyed seeing all of that develop. I did like how Dunk doesn't really give him any special treatment, so that was cool. But yeah, so overall, we explore more of like Targaryen history, and that was just interesting. And it's we following the perspective of Dunk, who's like not really anybody necessarily special. Like he doesn't come from any like noble families or anything like that. He's just a hedge knight trying to do his best. So I don't know. I feel like that's maybe a little more relatable. But yeah, so. This is a fun book. I would definitely recommend it. The next book I'll talk about is A Murderous Relation by Deanna Raybourn. So this is, I think, the 5th book in the Veronica Speedwell series, and I've talked about this before on my channel, but it's kind of like a historical mystery series with a very smart, fun heroine. So our main characters, Veronica and Stoker, are essentially hired to retrieve a trinket that the prince has given to a proprietress of a private club. In order to avoid a scandal. So meanwhile, Jack the Ripper is stalking the streets. So obviously they go to this brothel undercover and a body turns up. So the main mystery here is like solving who did it and just kind of avoiding scandals and other politics, and various things come up along the way. We finally got some resolution here with some of the threads, or some of the plot threads that have been building up throughout the books, and I'm not going to spoil things, I guess, but I was very pleased with how things turned out. I was just like, yes, finally.
Again, having to do the voiceover. So Veronica is still a delight to read. She's really liberal for a woman of this time, and that's maybe not historically accurate, but I didn't really care. I am here for it. She's super snarky and adventurous, so I definitely like her. I enjoyed them going undercover at the brothel. I thought that was pretty entertaining. In terms of the mystery, I didn't really guess what was going on, so that was nice. I enjoyed also this inclusion of Jack the Ripper, and while I would have preferred that the mystery have more to do with Jack the Ripper itself, I'm still glad that we had it set around Jack the Ripper, so that was nice for sure. There were definitely some really sweet moments between Veronica and some of the other characters. But yeah, so I think this is a really fun historical mystery, so I would definitely recommend this series if you're looking for these sort of historical mysteries.
The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Gilded World by Roshani Chokshi. So this is kind of another historical urban fantasy book, I guess. So this is set in Paris in 1889, and we basically have a group of people forced into tracking down a trinket or a magical artifact, I guess, and this is the Eye of Horus, essentially. So this Eye of Horus, or Horus Eye, as they kind of interchangeably refer to it, it's a magical artifact that they must recover in order for the ringleader of this group of people to regain his inheritance as one of the houses in this order of Babel. So I really like her writing overall. I read her Star Touch Queen book and all of those companion novels last year maybe, and really liked it. So I already knew I enjoyed her writing, and I definitely enjoyed this one. I personally thought it was much more fun and engaging than the Six of Crows duology, and that's what this is often compared to, because we have a group of people, there's a heist plot. So personally for me, this is definitely better, and I will continue on in this series. But generally speaking, comparing the two Six of Crows duology versus this one, I liked the characters a lot more, I liked the magic more, I liked the world more, I thought it was faster paced. There's certainly some things that are not fully explained in this world, like the magic, which is referred to as forging, is not entirely explained, and I don't know if it necessarily feels like we're, in 1889 Paris. The characters read older than their ages. Like, I think they're supposed to be teenagers, but they read like they're in like their 20s or 30s, which like isn't really a problem for me, but I don't know if other people may not like that as much, I guess. I really liked how this book involves like science and math and solving riddles and puzzles throughout the book. I liked how everybody has like wildly different personalities, and we got like a diverse group of people. I think Layla was probably my favorite character because she's like very thoughtful and kind, and I thought her backstory was really interesting. One of the characters, Zofia, was probably up there with Layla as my favorite characters of the crew. She's like kind of their engineer and like much more focused on math, and so like obviously being involved in math myself, I definitely thought she was relatable and just really enjoyed her a lot. This was a really fun book. So then the next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Silver Serpents, which is the sequel to The Gilded World, and this is an arc which I won in a Goodreads giveaway. So I don't know how much they had moved the publication date from, I think, February of this year to September. So I don't know how much this story will change from, this advanced reader's copy to the finished product, but, we'll see. So this is, I thought, a fun continuation of the story. They are, the same crew are back, and they must find these divine lyrics. Layla kind of needs them for her own purposes, but the Order of Babel, or Babel, whatever, have hired them to find this, and we deal with these like Babel fragments again, which are essentially like bits of pieces that would form together to like recreate the Tower of Babel. We also have this like fallen house come back and like, provide issues for us. So this one, instead of being in Paris, this takes place in Russia, so that was really neat. There's certainly some repetition here with Severin's background. Like, in The Gilded Wolves, there were kind of like introductions to some of the chapters about his past and like the various like father figures that he had in his life, and we get a little bit of that like same sort of story repeated here, but there's like a very slight twist to it, and it's kind of like reading from a different perspective and like uncovering new things. So like, I don't know, I like didn't love how it was repeating a lot of things that we knew, but I did appreciate like, it's like if we're gonna repeat some things, that's cool to add new information to it, I guess. Most of the characters continue to be wonderful. I'm not sure how much I really like Severin himself, but I continue to like Layla and Zofia quite a bit. We do get new characters introduced, and we have a new type of forging. So this is like blood forging. So that was a really interesting new type of magic that we learned about. There's still, like not a ton of explanation for the magic in the world, but I didn't really have a problem with that. I thought that was totally fine. There's some really cool scenes in here. Like there's kind of this ice palace with ice creatures in it, and I thought she did a really great job of like setting the scene and making me feel like I was there. There's also like a mechanical leviathan, which is really awesome. There's some kind of creepy bits as well. Like there's a bit of human sacrifice in here, so just be aware going into it. So I think the characters are now in their like 20s, so I think this problem that some readers may have with the characters like reading older than their actual age is kind of alleviated a little bit here. I will say obviously I enjoyed it, but I would like to get a finished copy here because like in The Gilded Wolves, there's pictures of the various puzzles that they have to solve. And here it's just like, obviously this is an advanced copy, so it just has like image to come. And I was like, oh, I'm missing out on some of the story because I can't see what they're actually looking at. So I think like once this actually comes out in print, I'll probably pick up the final copy and like see what I was missing. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. So I buddy read this with Angela from Literature Science Alliance and Brittany from Plants and Paperbacks. So this is Sarah J. Maas's like adult urban fantasy book, I guess. So we have our main character Bryce, who teams up with an angel in order to hunt down a demon and like seek justice. So I'm going to keep it kind of vague so I don't like spoil anything. It's a pretty interesting world. It's full of a whole variety of creatures. Like we've got, I think vampires are in it. There's werewolves, angels, demons, fae, like mermaids, mer people, witches, sorceresses. So like a whole bunch of, and obviously humans. So we have a whole bunch of creatures. The first part is definitely slow, and I would say like the first 500 or so pages were like, okay, I'm not like fully feeling it, and like at that point it was still kind of like a 3-star read for me. But then the last 300 pages really escalated things. I was like, all right, I'm invested. I want to know what happens. So, you know, like if you're also feeling like it's kind of going slow for you at first, I would say stick with it, because it does really escalate and get really quite wonderful at the end. Based on that ending, I am interested in continuing the series. I assume she's going to publish more. And Bryce, the main character, starts off as like kind of a party girl and a little bit irritating. But then like I really liked her character arc, and you know, again, this ending, I was like, yeah, she's badass. I love it. There was like a kind of an interesting magic system where you basically do this like drop where you are like obtaining power and achieving immortality. So everything to do with that was quite interesting, and I don't think I've seen really anything like that before. Well, there's certainly some surprising things that happen, and you know, it's like several moments which talking to like Angela and Brittany, I was like, what? There is like a bit of random usage of terms from Norse mythology, like this world is Midgard, and like they use like Hel, Hel, and then like the Veneer. So these are all like terms from Norse mythology, and like, you know, who knows if I'm actually pronouncing them correctly, but it was kind of strangely thrown in there. Like none of that had to do with Norse mythology itself, so like I don't know if she was just like, yes, these words sound cool, I'm gonna use them, but it was just like I guess a random aside and observation there. There's certainly some romance in here, but it's not as like smutty, I guess, as some of her other books, and I don't know if like we'll get more of that in future books in the series. But yeah, like overall I had a good time with this, and you know, if you're willing to stick out a bit of a slow start to get to like something really awesome, I would say definitely like check this out. The last of the 4-star books I'll talk about today is Hidden by Benedict Jacka. So I think this is the 5th book in the Alex Ferris series, which I've talked about multiple times on my channel, but essentially we have it's an urban fantasy series where our main character Alex is a diviner, so he like kind of sees probabilities of events and like can kind of predict the future, I guess, like that. This particular book deals a lot with Anne Walker, who's one of the characters who I think was introduced in the book 4, and so she's a life mage, but she gets kidnapped and taken into a shadow realm of her former dark mage mentors. So Alex ends up like trying to rescue her. And we also have this like plot thread where Alex's former master may be back. And this is like obviously not a good thing because he's a kind of scary dark mage. So this was good. I'm not sure I liked it quite as much as previous books. We didn't have as much of Luna or some of the other side characters that I really enjoy, and like Anne, I'm kind of not entirely sure how much I like her quite yet. So, you know, like I don't hate her or anything like that. I think she's really interesting, and like we had some more developments with her character here, and I think moving forward she could be really interesting. But just like as a whole, I think this particular plot didn't grip me quite as much as some of the other books. There's also some really cool elements here. Like we have these things called blink foxes, which are basically like teleporting foxes, which was awesome. I thought that was super cool. I think this is setting us up for a lot of the plot threads that we'll see in future books, which I think will probably have a lot to do with Alex's former master. I generally continue to really enjoy Alex and his magic. I think he's very funny and like kind of sarcastic, like Harry Dresden. So yeah, I'm like, if you like Harry Dresden, you'll also probably like Alex Ferris. So yeah, I am interested. I'm obviously going to continue the series. I think it's a really great urban fantasy series, and I'm excited to see where Alex's journey leads us. Now we move into the 4.5-star rating, and the first book I'll talk about here is The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. So this is kind of like a Western fantasy type book, where we have these girls in a brothel, and they basically like have these magical tattoos that control their movements and prevent escape. But one of the girls accidentally kills a man, so she and 4 other girls end up escaping this brothel, so that the girl who killed this dude doesn't get executed. So obviously like people are after them because this guy is kind of somebody important. So this was really enjoyable and like very fast paced. I thought it was a very interesting world, and you know, like it's not fully explored, I would say. Like we have elements like these magical tattoos and people without shadows. There's some kind of strange creatures introduced here, but you know, so they're like things aren't fully explained, but I really enjoyed them all overall. I really liked all of the girls. I thought Aster, who's kind of like the main character who we follow mostly, is pretty wary of everybody based on her experience. Sometimes it was like kind of hard to read, I guess, from her perspective. Like sometimes I would want her to just like trust in people, but like, you know, it's a totally understandable reaction that she's like really reluctant to trust other people, again, based on her experience in this brothel. I thought it was a very fun setting. I really liked this Western feel to it. You know, despite some of these like terrible things, like obviously this whole selling girls to brothels is not great. But I think overall this book is really full of hope, which I really appreciated. I really liked how the book ended though, and I'm not entirely sure if it's part of a series or not, but like if it is, I would definitely continue the series because I think it's a really interesting world, and I'm curious to see how a lot of these things resolve, and you know, like, can they lead a revolution or anything like that? I don't know. But yeah, so if you're looking for a Western fantasy type book, I would definitely pick this up. But then that leads me into my next 4.5-star book, which is An EasyJet by Charlaine Harris. So I was kind of in the mood for more of this Western setting. So this is like an alternative history urban fantasy. I think the premise here was like FDR ends up being assassinated, and the U.S. ends up kind of like being broken up into parts. Some of the parts are controlled by England, some by Canada, some by Russia, some by Mexico, and there's like a little bit still, I guess that's like America. So our main character, Elizabeth, is a gunny, so she's kind of like a gun-slinging security person. So she is hired to protect two like Russian wizards on their quest to find a guy. So we have like the entire Romanov family who have survived and moved to the US, and a lot of the plot has to deal with them. Being a gunny is obviously like really dangerous work, and I really liked reading how like badass Elizabeth was. I thought this was a really fun book overall. It kind of reminded me of why I enjoyed her writing. Like, she's the author of the Sookie Stackhouse books, and like I liked a lot of those, but then the ending, or the last few books, just like really went on a decline in quality, I thought. But I thought this was like a nice reminder of like, oh yes, she is actually a good writer. I do enjoy her books. I think this was very fast-paced. There's some really interesting elements here. We have, you know, various creatures like zombies, and then we have this whole magic and kind of interesting like cultural things. Like a lot of wizards end up joining Russia, I guess, because they are more welcoming to wizards, things like that. Obviously there's like a Western sort of feel here, and I've mentioned that. It's really enjoyable, and I will say the mass market paperback edition has like the smallest damn font I've ever read. It was I had to like kind of squint to read it, but yeah, so just like, I guess, be aware going into it, if you're going to pick up this mass market paperback, this font is tiny. But overall, I would say it was a really fun read, and I would recommend it. I'm interested in continuing the series, though I've heard there's maybe some like strange things going on with book 2, in that like there's some like weird plot elements that I may not like as much, so, you know, we'll see. The next 4.5-star book I'll talk about is Burn the Dark by S.A. Hunt. So this is, I think, also an urban fantasy, I would say, where we follow a witch hunter who, like, hunts witches for YouTube. And she returns home to seek revenge on a group of witches who killed her mother. And she ends up essentially getting help from a fun group of people. Then we also have this, like, in the background, we have this Red Lord who is, like, this threat who has been around for most of her life. This was really enjoyable, and there's certainly some really creepy moments. Like, there's a scene that takes place, like, in a public restroom at night where nobody else is around, and it was like, oh, that's creepy. The witches are definitely not nice at all. They are super creepy, so, like, I'm totally fine with our main character hunting these witches. I really liked Robin's quest to... Robin is the main character. I really liked her quest to kill all these witches. I thought she was, like, badass. She has, like, a mohawk. I enjoyed her whole, like, YouTube career, obviously, since I am also on YouTube, though I'm not hunting witches. We do have some kind of, like, flashbacks to Robin's life, and she does, I think, go to a psychiatric hospital or something like that, so I guess content warnings for that? I don't know. I really liked one of the side characters, Joel. I thought he was like a super sassy dude, and I just really thought he was delightful. This Red Lord situation is pretty creepy, and like, just the descriptions of him are kind of horrifying. It was super fast-paced, a really fun urban fantasy, and I definitely want book 2. It ends kind of, it's not quite a cliffhanger, but things aren't really fully resolved, I guess, so just like go into it knowing that. But I think book 2 comes out I think it's in May, so, you know, not too long of a wait at all. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it. The last 4.5-star book I'll talk about is Through the White Wood by Jessica Leake. So this is a companion book to Beyond a Darkened Shore, which I read a few months ago and really loved. So this is set in Russia, and our main character, Katya, has, like, ice powers, essentially. And so she ends up getting banished by her village and sent to the prince, who's, like, kind of collecting people with various powers in order to, like, fight off other people who have earth powers. And these people with earth powers are basically, like, trying to take over and, like, destroy everything. So this was really fun. I thought this was, like, super atmospheric. I really enjoyed the use of Russian folklore here. Like, we have, you know, things like Baba Yaga and the Firebird and, like, Rusalkas, I think. I really liked the main character, Katya, quite a bit. I think she's kind of, like, similar to Kiara, who's the protagonist from Beyond a Darkened Shore, in that she's kind of, like, starts off being afraid of herself and her powers, and then, you know, like, learns how her powers work and how to use them and everything as the book progresses. I appreciate how she, like, wants to help people, and I did like her ice powers in general. I thought that was super cool, and just, like, you know, learning more about that was really awesome. The side characters are really cool, too. I think there's a character who is Mongolian, and she has, like, shadow powers, so that was, you know, that was neat. That was a fun, she was a fun character. I didn't feel, I think what kind of stopped this from being a full 5-star read for me was, like, I didn't quite feel the romance as much here as I did in Beyond a Darkened Shore. And I also felt like the threat wasn't quite as, like, dire as it was in Beyond a Darkened Shore. Like, I don't know. It just wasn't quite the same level of, like, dread, I guess, that I had. As a whole, I still really loved it. It's lovely writing. It's a very nice, like, escapist fantasy book. I think these two books are really great. I would definitely recommend them if you're interested in, like, this sort of fairy tale-esque book set in the real world where, you know, like, we have strong female protagonists who have powers and, like, you know, want to save the day and everything. So I'm definitely interested in picking up more of her books and, you know, whatever else she writes in the future. So now we get into the 5-star books, and I only have 2 of them to talk about today. So the first of the 5-star books I'll talk about is Imaginary Numbers by Seanan McGuire. So this is, I think, book 9 in the Encrypted series, and I've talked about that before on my channel, but it's an urban fantasy series where we have this, like, family who are kind of, like, trying to protect various supernatural creatures throughout the world. So we follow Sarah's point of view in this book, and now usually we follow various members of the main Price family, but Sarah is kind of like an adopted cousin, I think, and she is a cuckoo, and this is like a supernatural creature species where they're basically like telepathic wasp humanoids. These cuckoos are all obsessed with math, which of course I love. The main plot here is that there's, like, cuckoos everywhere, and it's kind of like, you know, cuckoos versus humans, and it's a really intense plot. I thought this was really fantastic. I enjoyed reading from Sarah's point of view. Like I said, we usually follow the members of the Price family, so this was a fun new point of view character to follow. She's kind of, like, had to put herself back together over the course of the books based on, you know, various events that have happened, and I admire the fact that, you know, she's still kind of afraid that she hasn't, like, really fully put herself back together, but she's still trying. The ending is insane. I just, like, what even happened? Oh my god. I definitely would like the next book as soon as possible. I just need to read it. I thought it was really interesting to finally learn a bit more about the cuckoos themselves. Like, they've been featured throughout these books, but, like, we learn more about them here. There's also a short story in the back of the book, which I didn't realize, but it's about Annie and Grandma Alice, and this takes place after the events of the last book. And I think it brings up a lot of interesting plot points for the next book, I would say. But yeah, so this is a really fantastic urban fantasy series. Like, you know, I think most people on BookTube seem to read Seanan McGuire's Wayward Children series, but I highly encourage you to check out this one as well, and as well as the October Day series. But I would say probably the Encrypted series is my favorite of her books, and I think they're just, like, really engaging, and they tend to be happier, I guess. I don't know, and I like just this whole trying to save these supernatural creatures. So I would definitely recommend this series for sure, and I can't wait to continue these books. The last 5-star book I'll talk about is Follow Me by Kathleen Barbers. This is a thriller where our main character, Ahdieh, who is a social media star, moves to DC to work as like a social media manager at the Smithsonian, and she basically gets a really sketchy apartment with locks that has some issues. She only knows like a former friend and an ex-boyfriend. She also has this guy who's like kind of obsessively stalking her and like basically like obsessively following her social media career. So this was super creepy, and particularly with a lot of the social media aspect, oh my god, it was a little horrifying. It definitely kept me guessing. I basically like suspected everybody. I definitely appreciated how I wasn't immediately able to guess who it was. So as the book progresses, we also learn more about Audrey's friend and, you know, maybe like how well does Audrey actually know her friend? I would say like no one is super likable, but like Audrey is still really interesting. She is certainly like very self-absorbed, but I think she's pretty well-meaning overall. So just like generally speaking, it was really interesting to keep reading from her perspective. So I definitely just enjoyed that a lot. I would say this is like a very readable thriller. It did not take me long to finish. I just blew through it. Audrey makes some questionable decisions, I would say. I don't want to spoil things, but yeah. I would really recommend this. This was a very enjoyable thriller. Okay, so those were the 19 books that I've read so far this month. Again, I'm sorry if this is going up a little bit later than I anticipated. Just kind of given the current situation, I haven't really felt like filming, and now, of course now our internet is out, so hopefully that will return soon and I can actually post this. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. You know, I hope you're all staying safe out there and, you know, social distancing for the win. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, so that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.